It was one of those quiet evenings in the city when everything seemed to stand still. The golden light of the setting sun poured through my apartment window, casting long shadows across the room. I was sorting through old boxes of books and knickknacks that had accumulated over the years when I found it, the envelope. The envelope was tucked away in the corner of an old wooden crate, wedged between two dusty photo albums. It was plain, the edges slightly frayed, and there was no return address, just my name, written in a familiar looping script. The handwriting was unmistakable, my grandmother's. She had passed away 2 years ago, and I had thought I'd gone through everything she left behind. But this envelope was a mystery. I felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation as I picked it up. What could it be? Carefully I tore open the top of the envelope, my heart racing slightly as I unfolded the single piece of paper inside. It wasn't a letter as I had expected, but a small map. The paper was old, yellowed with age, but still intact. The edges had been worn down, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. I stared at the map for a moment, trying to make sense of it. It was a hand-drawn sketch of the local area where my grandmother had lived. I recognized the streets and landmarks, but there were a few places marked on the map that I didn't recognize. X's over certain locations, an old house, a park, a small shop down the street from my childhood home. At the bottom of the map, in her familiar handwriting, was a note. "If you're reading this, it's time to finish what I started." I was puzzled. My grandmother had always been full of stories, adventures, family legends, mysteries she'd solved, but I had never heard of anything like this. Finish what I started felt like an invitation, but to what? It wasn't the kind of thing I could ignore. After all, this was my grandmother, the woman who had raised me after my parents had passed. She had always been so full of life, so vibrant, and I couldn't help but feel that, in some way, she was speaking to me from beyond the grave. I couldn't leave this unexplored. The next morning I set out. I followed the map, not really knowing what I was looking for, but certain there was something waiting for me. The first place was an old, now abandoned house just a few blocks away. The house had been empty for years, ever since I was a child. It was the kind of place kids dared each other to visit, but most avoided. I stood in front of it, looking up at the cracked windows and overgrown yard. My grandmother had always told me stories about this place, how it used to be home to a mysterious couple who kept to themselves. As a child, I had believed in all the local legends about hidden treasures and secrets behind the house's ivy-covered walls. But as an adult, I had dismissed it all as imagination. But now, with the map in hand, those childhood fantasies didn't seem so silly. I stepped closer to the house, pushing open the rusted gate. The yard was overgrown with weeds, the path to the front door long lost beneath moss and vines. I hesitated before stepping inside. The house creaked under my feet, the air thick with dust and the scent of age. The interior was as I had remembered it, dim and full of forgotten relics of the past. But something about it felt different now, almost alive in a way I couldn't quite explain. I turned left, following the map's directions, and found myself standing in front of a boarded-up door at the back of the house. The map had marked this spot with an X. I hesitated but then reached for the old weathered boards. They came off with a little effort, revealing a small room hidden behind the door. Inside the room was a chest, old and heavy, covered in dust. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. My heart raced as I bent down to open it. Inside I found what appeared to be a collection of journals and letters, wrapped tightly in brown paper. I gingerly picked one up and unwrapped it. As I read the first page, it all became clear. This was my grandmother's journal. She had kept records of her own adventures, hidden away in this very house. She had been part of something bigger than I had ever imagined, something I never knew about when she was alive. She had uncovered secrets about the neighborhood, its people, and even the strange couple who had once lived in that house. My grandmother had been an amateur historian of sorts, piecing together forgotten history, things that others had chosen to leave buried. There were tales of old alliances, unspoken agreements, and family secrets. It was a history I had never known, and it made me realize that there was much more to the world around me than I had ever thought. With the journal in hand, I returned home, feeling a mixture of awe and confusion. My grandmother had led me on this unexpected journey, not just to uncover a piece of the past, but to continue a legacy I hadn't even known existed. I spent the next few weeks reading through the journals, piecing together a story that had been hidden for generations. And as I read, I realized something. This was more than a treasure hunt. It was a message, a reminder from my grandmother that there was still more to discover, more to explore, and more stories to tell. My life, like hers, was only just beginning to unfold. And as I closed the final journal, I knew my grandmother had left me with a gift. Not just the secrets of the past, but the key to understanding my own future.